All right, hello everybody. As we're all joining in, this is a wonderfully overcast afternoon in Eugene, Oregon, and I'm thrilled to be here. Professor Nab, thank you so much for setting this up. It's a great opportunity to share information, and it's a great opportunity to share all kinds of sounds and opinions and our love of saxophone and literature. Ooh, and see all kinds of familiar faces and the people join in. That's great. That's really, really great. Sweet. Um, while people are still joining in, a little bit of information about myself. I'm professor of saxophone and jazz studies at the University of Oregon School of Music and Dance. I've received two university-wide teaching awards for my specialty in teaching saxophone technique and for coaching chamber music. I have 6 CDs as a soloist slash leader, and I appear on over 15 CDs as a side person. I've been teaching all over the world, and I am thrilled to be sharing with you today some thoughts I had about the diminished scale and the melodic minor scale. You know, the academic conversation is a multi-tier building, and we all join in on the ideas of our predecessors. So every time an idea is not mine, I will credit it to whomever it is. But if I don't credit anything, that means it's my own original thinking. All right? But I will do my best to credit these ideas and these thoughts as they come along. All right. Hope the read still works. All right, let's get started. Let's turn on this PowerPoint. Okay, whoops. So, share. Okay. All right. So today we're going to be talking about diminished scales, melodic minor 13th chords, how to practice them, and their application to saxophone literature. I would like to start by thanking my student, Hayden Harper, who is a terrific classical saxophonist, but also a music theory master's student here in Oregon, and he noted some of these examples for me. So first things first, why do we practice scales? So this is a selected list. We play scales to gain technical control over the whole range of the instrument. We connect our ear to the saxophone pitch-wise, and we connect our ear to the saxophone subdivision-wise. We play scales to help us digest a new piece of music, and we play scales to improve consistency in performance. So for example, if I play my major scales, and I play my major scales in thirds, it's really going to help me out playing, let's say, Dubois Concerto Movement 3. Right? Because it's all scalar based. The thing is, so much of our literature is 20th century and 21st century. So a lot of our music is based on synthetic scales and scales that are not necessarily major or minor. So today I'm going to be talking about two of these. We're going to talk about the modes of the melodic minor and about the diminished scales. The diminished scale, here we go. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. It is a symmetrical scale. Since this is a symmetrical scale, there are 3 diminished scale patterns on the saxophone. In classical music theory, these are called whole half octatonic scale. Octa because it has 8 notes to it. In jazz parlance or slang, this is called the diminished scale, but those two terms are interchangeable. So we have our whole half octatonic or diminished scale. We have B flat, B, and C. Our finger pattern for D flat diminished and E diminished and G diminished is the same as the finger pattern for B flat diminished, right? So this sounds like this. So the first thing we need to do is to practice these 3 scales using the full range of the saxophone, followed by the full range arpeggio. Many saxophone studios around the country do this already. For example, Dr. Eric Nessler at the University of North Texas, he asks all his students to play full range. And if you notice that we're going from low B flat to high F sharp, we're going to use a metronome, and we're going to come down the same way we went up. So just really quick, this will sound like this. Always use a metronome. Always. Here we go. And of course, there are 3 of those scales, so this does not take a long time. But this is where my original thinking starts. Yes, we're going to practice all those scales and we're going to memorize them, we're going to use the full range, but we are not actually practicing the sound that appears so often in classical saxophone. Not all forms of diminished scales are used equally. Composers, classical composers, and jazz players have a strong preference for whole step, half step going up and whole step, half step going down forms of the diminished scale. If you look at the notated example, you will notice that we have a leading tone going up from C to B, and then we have a leading tone going down, E flat, D flat, C. So here's the sound. I suspect that because of this double leading tone, that's why so many composers and jazz players are drawn to this sound. Now, this is not 100% foolproof, of course. Are there examples in classical saxophone that show the other use of diminished scale, like half whole going up? Of course there are, but there's a strong preference for this way. So, notable examples. This is the fun part. Any Sonny Stitt solo, like seriously. I have my classical setup on, so this is gonna sound dorky. Right? Now let's get into the super fun stuff. So the list over here is far from comprehensive. I just tried to bring examples that I thought you might be familiar with because they are well played and often performed parts of our repertoire. So here we go. Paul Maurice, Tableau de Provence, Movement 5, Cadenza. That's the very, very end of the cadenza. Desenclos. Desenclos, Prelude, Cadencé, and Finale. The whole piece is just doing this. So I don't even know what part I should play for you because it's the whole piece. And the whole place is doing that. Same thing with Desenclo Quatuor. Gutkowski Concerto, Ibert, of course. Let's see, Muzinsky Sonata. This is really interesting. So the Muzinsky Sonata first movement has a lot of half hole going up, but the second movement has a lot of whole half going down. Right? It's literally that example that you have right there. Creston Concerto, third movement. Straight up, whole half going up. Paul Bonneau Concerto. And like I said, there's so many other examples. The list is endless. All right. So it makes more sense to practice the sound that is used in all these pieces. Practice the diminished scale sound within one octave first, going up whole step, half step, coming down whole step, half step. Progress through the circle of fourths. Now this is a little unusual since, yes, each diminished scale little exercise is not going to cover the whole range of the saxophone, but because it is a symmetrical scale, it is more important to train our ear to hear this particular melody within an octave. If we play this through the whole range of the saxophone, our ear will become disconnected. That's more important. So, as always, with a metronome, let me just play these for you real quick. This will not take long. Hopefully you can hear the metronome. And here are the rest of them written down. Generally speaking, I prefer playing all my technical assignment from ear and not writing them down. I just wrote this down for the sake of being very clear in the presentation. Once you practiced all the scales within an octave, play each diminished scale within 2 octaves. All right? Now, in the scales of A flat and A, that's going to take us into the altissimo register. But I think that's okay. So it will sound like this. For the sake of time, I won't play through all of them. I'll just play through a few. I don't know. super, super, super helpful to technique, to controlling our technique, and to once we get to actually digesting all these pieces, the pattern is going to be somewhat familiar in our hand, and it's going to take a lot less time to digest the piece, a lot less time to prepare it, and you will make it so that we miss less in performance. We might have just a really flawless performance. Okay, before I move on to melodic minor 13th chords, most of my examples were from our bread and butter literature, French composers of 1945, 1955, 1960-ish. There are many other examples. Rueff is also very good at this. Notably, with more recent compositions like Stacy Garrop. Stacy Garrop really prefers the half-whole going up form of diminished scale, and she often uses going up whole half sprinkled with a few chromatic tones. So with very modern composers and pieces that were written in the very, very last few years, the line is often blurred. Okay, moving on. Melodic minor 13th chords. Melodic minor 13th chords. Using the ascending form of melodic minor, let's build a 13th chord on each scale degree. So right now, our bank of notes, if you will, is just C, melodic minor, C, D, E flat, F, G, A natural, B natural, C. So I'm taking this bank of notes and I'm constructing a 13th chord. I'm stacking thirds on each of our scale degrees. And I'm going to end up with a whole bunch of really interesting 13th chords. Major scales have names for all the modes. So if I were to do this with the major, with C major, I would end up with C major, natural 13th, D minor, minor, D minor with natural 9, 11, and 13th. And I would just be able to call these Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. But the modes of the melodic minor don't have discrete titles, so we're going to have to just call them first mode melodic minor, second mode melodic minor, third mode melodic minor. Okay, so we end up with a whole bunch of really interesting sounds. I'm just going to play these for you slowly so you can hear them. All right, and now for the fun part. So why does this matter? Now, right? Why do we bother with this? A few examples of pieces that use melodic minor 13th chords. And again, I picked examples that hopefully you'll be familiar with. There are many other pieces that use this. Let's start with Walter Hartley because that's a really obvious example. In Walter Hartley's Concerto for Alto Saxophone and Band, the third movement in the last page of the piece has literally A minor major 7 that goes up and down in 6 couplets. A really literal example. This is where it gets interesting. William Albright, Sonata, 4th movement, recitative. We have this massive arpeggio that goes up and down. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. This our particular arpeggio, William Albright is not using a literal melodic minor chord. We can say he's using several different chords stacked on each other. But if we practice melodic minor 13th chords, we will get used to the fact that we have different chords and different sounds, and the technique of the lower octave is different than the technique of the upper octave. And this is a huge benefit when it comes to late 20th and early 21st century music. So for William Albright, it's, I'm misspelling it, but we start with a C sharp melodic minor with an A in the bass, and then we add a G and an A flat. So it's not exactly melodic minor. It's like melodic minor with 2, 3, 4 notes, but the concept is very helpful and it does transfer. Moving on, Denisov Sonata, more very particularly the very, very last page of the piece. I don't have Denisov Sonata memorized. Please excuse me. But it's like... And it's chords that are stacked on chords that are stacked upon chords. And if we practice those, then we get, when it's time to digest the Denisov Sonata, it'll be a whole lot easier, and our ear will be stretched to hear those stacked chords. So now, let's get to practicing these sounds. Give credit where credit is due. This is a Jim Riggs, Professor Emeritus, now retired from University of North Texas. Jim Riggs exercise that was assigned to jazz studies majors. Mr. Riggs attributed the subdivisions of this exercise to flute pedagogue Marcel Moïse. Application to melodic minor is Riggs's, and how this applies to classical saxophone is my own original thinking. So let's look at how to practice this. First, we set our metronome. How are we doing on time? We're doing great. We set our metronome to 58. You can do this, if this is too fast, you can do this at 56. If this is obviously way too easy, you can play it faster at 60. So we're going to set our metronome to 68. Okay. We're going to pick a tonality. So let's say we're going to pick C minor. Play each melodic minor 13th chord, all slurred, once in each subdivision. We're going to play each melodic minor chord as an 8th note, as 8th note triplets, as 16th notes. Then we're going to breathe. Then we're going to play that chord as a septuplet 3 times, and then we're going to play it as a flurry 3 times. If all the subdivisions are executed correctly and the flurry was even, then we can move on to the next chord in the same melodic minor key. So for example, we're going to do all the different subdivisions in the first chord of C minor, and then we're going to do all the subdivisions in the second mode of C melodic minor, which is D, then in the third mode of C melodic minor, which is an E flat. Since each key has 7 chords in it, this will take some time. That's okay. A good place to start is 1 key or 7 chords per week. You can start with C minor and progress through the circle of fourths. I'm slurring my articulation. My chosen articulation for this exercise is all slurred. And I'm trying to practice one thing at a time, so this is not an altissimo exercise. If you don't have an altissimo register yet, start in the lower octave so you don't run into altissimo. Okay. These technical exercises should be performed from memory. I cannot stress that enough. The more you don't look at the page, the more you internalize something and you listen better. You listen better for pitch, you listen better for articulation, you listen better for subdivision. So the less looking at the page, the better. Here, I'm about to play for you a notated example of what E-flat melodic minor will sound like, but it is notated for the sake of clarity. So if at all possible, play those without looking at the page. All right. When I first designed this presentation, I wasn't exactly sure how long this is going to take, but it seems like we have time for me to play all of them. So I'm going to do that right now. Here we go. So we are in the key of E-flat melodic minor, and I've constructed a 13th chord on each one of the notes of E-flat melodic minor, and I will play each one of those 13th chords in a variety of subdivision. Right. And it will sound like this. I put the metronome really far from me so it's close to the microphone, so I kind of having a hard time hearing the metronome. Hopefully it's close enough that you can hear it. Okay. Hopefully you will be going through all 7 chords of each key and very gradually go through all 12 keys. So this is like a long-term project. This is not something that we're just gonna crank out in a day. But again, the major benefits of this are practicing. We're gonna have a whole bunch of whole step and half steps that are different in the octaves of the saxophone. In the first chord of E flat melodic minor, we're gonna have F sharp in the lower octave and F and the upper octave. And that is a huge, huge benefit for anybody who is playing modern literature. Okay, so here's the rest of this exercise all written out. Happy shredding. You're very much welcome to play this faster, if you will, or of course slower when you at first start. So we're doing great on time. And now I would like to open this up to questions from the floor. So here we go. Stop share. Anybody who is here at our forum is welcome to write some questions in the chat or even unmute yourself and have at it. Oh, a question. Okay. Do you prescribe certain fingerings for basses? It depends. It really depends. It depends on the key. It depends on the key, on the universe of E flat melodic minor. Since we have an environment that only has B flats and it does not have any B naturals, I would use bis all the way. But if we have an environment that has both A sharps and Bs, such as, for example, the key of G sharp minor, I would be using side. So keys that have both B flat and B natural would have side, and the keys that do not have a B natural, I would use bis. I am a huge fan of 1 and 1 and 1 and 2. I just think it's a terrible idea. I know some classical saxophonists are more a fan of that, and even certain Londex exercises have 1/2 and 1/1 suggested, but in these particular exercises, no. Either side or bis. All right. Any other questions? How do you practice inserting melodic minor 15th chords into your improvised solos? Ooh, it just happens. Well, I will give you a multi-tiered answer. By practicing these sounds, you start hearing the sounds and you're being exposed to these sounds. That's step one. It would not be possible for me to have something in my soloing that I do not hear in my mental music imagery. Not possible. So in order for me to use any kind of sound, I have to put it in the bank first. So the repetition of playing through those sounds will mean that I'm more familiar from an aural skill point of view, and I will be able to hear those sounds more often. So that's step one. After you hear those sounds, you will start being able to say, well, this is more interesting, this is less interesting. More particularly, melodic minor has several different applications. In the jazz world, we have a few standard applications. This is so applicable to both jazz and classical saxophone. I love it. I can speak of how you are able to perform in both idioms as well. How do you compartmentalize your approach? Sure. Melodic minor. But melodic minor in jazz, really quick, you could play melodic minor up a half step from a dominant chord to achieve altered sound. You could play melodic minor up a minor third from a half diminished chord to achieve half diminished sound. You can play melodic minor on the fifth of a dominant chord to achieve a natural 9 sharp 11 sound. That's like the basic. Okay, compartmentalizing my approach. We have time, so I'll give you the long answer. It's really painful to switch between those two idioms. It takes me about honestly, it takes me about 3 days to shift my facial mask and the embouchure and the syllable and the voicing from classical to jazz. But in all honesty, it takes me about 2, maybe 3 weeks to truly feel at home in either genre. Because the mental shift between the two genres is much more difficult than the facial mask shift. It's the mental shift between, well, there's only absolutely one answer to play this phrase. This phrase must be nailed and it has to go like this. And the other mental way of doing things in jazz, which is like, well, this phrase can be like this or like this or like this or like this, and it can definitely be the blues. And so it's a big mental shift between thinking about a math equation that has only one solution and thinking about a math equation that has endless amounts of solutions. And half of them are the blues. So it's really difficult. And the also honest answer is that when I switch, I transcribe. I transcribe both classical and jazz, especially when I switch. So if I have not played classical saxophone seriously, honestly, I would put on Ken Che's recording of Kaufman Meditation and play along with that without looking at sheet music. If I have not played classical saxophone for a really long time, I would put on a recording of the second movement of Heinrich Feld Sonata and just play along with that without looking at the sheet music, just like transcribing. And same thing for jazz. If I have not played jazz in a really long time, I always go back to Sonny Stitt and I always go back to Charlie Parker. I listen a lot to Cannonball Adderley, but transcribing Cannonball Adderley is really, really complicated. So I really stick with a lot of Charlie Parker and Sonny Stitt for transcribing. For listening, I listen to a whole bunch of people. Okay, and that's how I compartmentalize. I have different alto saxophones, different mouthpieces, different reeds, and different ligatures. So I have 2 separated setups. But it's really the mental shift that is most challenging. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Anything about these particular exercises? All right. Well, it seems like we are good for this session. So thank you all very much for everybody who tuned in. Thank you for all who were about to tune in and going to see this afterwards as the recording. If you have any questions about any of these exercises or would like a PDF of the handout, let me know. And again, thank you so much for Professor Nathan Knapp, who's been putting this excellent series together. And I can't wait to see all of you in real life.